On today's show, we cover week one in the NBA, cover uh, our Western Conference preview, our long anticipated Western Conference preview, a week late. Go over all of the intriguing Western Conference teams, their best case scenario, their worst case scenario. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave us a 5-star rating and review. Cue the intro. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Emmy Nixon. Today is October 26, 2022. We're covering the NBA's Week 1, a surprising Week 1. And joining me from Austin, Texas, as always, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Lean. What's up?
NBA Week 1. We're 1 week in to the NBA regular season, which started last Tuesday. We are recording here at 11:32 p.m. on a Wednesday night. We're going to do our Western Conference preview as well. One of the bigger episodes every year, as there's so much usually to talk about. Before we start, though, just some things I think y'all should be looking out for over the next couple of days. First of all, this episode will be up as soon as we're done here, as it is a live episode. So thank you guys for tuning in wherever you may be tuning in. And leave your comments and predictions down below for where you think some of these teams will land, whether that be your favorite team or teams that intrigue you, and what you think is going to happen in the Western Conference this upcoming season or this season. But it's a busy time in sports. So we didn't have our traditional football picks podcast last week. We kind of did like a late Saturday night, early Sunday morning NFL picks show this weekend. But we didn't do our regular weekly NFL picks and college picks. So we'll be doing that probably tomorrow, maybe Friday. It's not a great weekend of matchups per se, but it is going to be a longer episode because we're bringing back maybe we haven't decided yet, maybe like the panic meter segment we did at the beginning of the season, or power ranking segment, something along those lines. So you'll want to tune in for that. And then also the World Series starts on Friday, so we're going to do an episode for the World Series. It might even include some college basketball content on that episode, as well as the season tips off in 12 days. So it's a busy week here on the Raw Prospect Podcast, so be sure, as it says on the bottom of your screen, like, subscribe, and let's get into it.
Thanks for all that. We kind of neglect the housekeeping side of things on this podcast usually. So we're going to try to do a better job of that moving forward. But y'all aren't here for that. We're just going to get into it. Let's cover week 1. So I'm just going to start off with you. What are your takeaways from week 1? What team stood out to you the most? Just start off with that.
Week 1 was interesting. I got to watch opening night's games and some games here and there in between where we are now and where we started. I guess the biggest takeaway I have from week 1, Portland, the Portland Trailblazers. And I don't want to go, too deep because I know Portland's a team we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But, I didn't watch any NBA tonight. But they were undefeated coming into tonight's action. I believe Dame went down with a calf strain. Don't know how serious that is. I think they ended up losing tonight. Is that correct?
Yep.
But regardless, they were 4-0 coming into tonight. They're playing really good basketball. Anthony Simons has looked fantastic to start the season. Dame has at points in times looked like himself again. And those additions that they made during the offseason, Jeremy Grant, Josh Hart, and Gary Payton II, who's yet to play yet, I think those additions are showing their impact on the defensive end of the floor. They've changed sort of the way they play the pick and roll with Yusuf Nurkic, playing him, up to the touch point on ball screens and dropping him back to cover the screener. Jeremy Grant and Josh Hart and some of the other guys that they've added to this roster have given them the ability to go small ball where they can switch everything and giving them more versatility defensively, which I really like. I wasn't very high on Portland coming in, but I think I was impressed with what I've seen so far with the Portland Trailblazers. The question is going to be, obviously, they've been pretty bad defensively the past couple seasons. You look at their defensive rating the past couple seasons, it's near the bottom of the league. That defensive backcourt is at times flammable. It's not very good. There are limitations there, but the additions that they've made could help aid them defensively, and they have the offense, it seems like, to go along with it. So I think so far, what I've seen from Portland, as long as Dame is healthy, they could definitely be a team that makes some noise. I don't know how far they'll go. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but Portland's definitely my biggest takeaway so far.
Yeah, and it all really depends on the health of Damian Lillard. As good as those support pieces are, Dame goes down and everything changes. The whole outlook of the season changes. But obviously, we hope for Dame to make a quick recovery from this injury. But we'll have to see how they do with Dame out. Probably for the next few games, he'll be out. So will they be able to, hold the fort, or will they just fall right back to 500? That'll be interesting to see for sure. But for me personally, I've been watching a lot of NBA basketball this opening week. The NBA was doing a free trial for NBA League Pass, so I've been taking full advantage of that. Probably watching more basketball than I'd care to admit, to be honest. I've been watching a lot of basketball. But biggest things to me, man, to start off, first of all, Paolo Banchero is a bucket. Like, point blank, just a bucket. Like, he's just so polished as a scorer. We knew this coming in, but me personally, I didn't think it would start clicking this quickly. But he gets to the line on command. He knows his moves before he makes them. He does things with intent, and he's a extremely, you know, opportunistic passer as well. Underrated part of his game. So really impressed with Paolo Banchero on an individual level. But in terms of teams, I would have to mention the Sixers. I'm not sure what is really happening with that team right now, but they're currently at 0-4, I believe. They just lost again tonight, and they're 1-4. Their lone win coming against the Indiana Pacers, a team that is not looking to win games right now. So they have a lot to figure out. That team looks like they don't have any fire. Like, they just look like they're nonchalant and casual, and they just look to get bailed out by the high end talent each and every game, and that's just not going to cut it. So I've been like this with my takes on the Sixers every year, but that remains the same. It's just I have to see it in the playoffs with the Sixers, and until they show me that they can have those winning habits in these regular season games, I don't know how I could trust them come playoff time. That's a long way from now. They could definitely figure things out.
I was listening to the Mismatch podcast on the Ringer podcast network with Chris Vernon, who's a resident Memphis Grizzlies fan, and Kevin O'Connor, who's a great covers NBA fantastically for the Ringer. And they were talking about their first impressions on the NBA season on Monday's pod, and they talked about Philadelphia and how, Joel Embiid, this Joel Embiid story about how he didn't even, talk to the media after the second game of the season. Like that's some real stuff that I think the casual fan may not think too much of, but that's your leader. That's possibly the MVP of the league. That's your guy that's supposed to, stand up to the media and take it, take the punches, if you will, when things aren't going well. And they started 0-3, and I think if things continue to go this way, Doc Rivers is going to be – he's probably going to be the first one, like it or not, to sacrifice himself and fall on the sword for the team, as he'll probably be on the hot seat sooner rather than later. And I'm also interested to see what that team ends up doing with Tobias Harris.
Right.
That will be interesting with his salary. We know what he can give you offensively, but it just, with some of the missed rotations defensively, the lack of buy-in defensively, I think it might not be a great fit anymore in Philadelphia. So there are a lot of storylines to talk about in Philadelphia. We can get deeper into that as the season goes forward. I do think it's early, a little bit early to overreact to that start. I think that team's too good not to end up, I've been impressed by what I've seen from James Harden so far. I think that team's too good to just not end up taking off at some point. But it's been a slow start, and it's a little worrisome that it seems like Joel Embiid is, I don't want to say not bought in, but just like, I don't even have the word for it. It's just a little weird.
Something's a little bit off. I'll
give
you that. And it's pretty clear. It's hard to really put your finger on it without just being in that locker room. But something is definitely off. And I'm going to give you all a hot take here. I don't know if Joel Embiid will win a championship until he changes his style of play a little bit, particularly with the flopping. He plays physically in the paint. He can shoot. He can do so many things offensively. He truly has an offensive skill set that rivals any big man in the history of the game. But when it comes to the flopping, those calls aren't going to come for you in the playoffs. And we're seeing it early in the season even. Some of those calls aren't coming for him because they know he's flopping. He ends up on the ground. Then your defense ends up in the 4-on-5 and giving it up on the other end. So little things like that, just in the details. He's solid defensively. We all know that. But the defensive focus isn't there at times. He's just got to be present mentally. And I'm not sure if that's the case right now. And obviously, and it would be understandable if it was in the long, ups and downs of the regular season, in the middle of the season. But this is at the very beginning of the season. This is when you're supposed to come out, show the strength of your team, show why you're one of the best in the world. And he just simply hasn't done that. So I'm not high on Joel Embiid right now. Put it that way.
That's fair. I think 15 minutes in, we should wrap this segment up here in a couple of minutes. But one thing I did want to mention is one of the bigger, I guess, offseason signings was Jalen Brunson to the Knicks. And, I haven't watched a Knicks game in its entirety, but from what I have seen via highlights in the other, just reading about how every team has done so far this season through the first week of the year, Brunson seems to be working in New York so far. He's had a good start. He sort of steadied their ship offensively. And Julius Randle, so far this season, with his usage rate down, I think we're getting a better version than we saw last year so far of Julius Randle. And I think he's become the big beneficiary of this Jalen Brunson signing with all the pick and rolls, the pick and pops, playing to Julius Randle's strengths, and sort of just that steady hand, offensively that we thought the Knicks were getting when they signed Jalen Brunson. I mean, you know what you're going to get night in, night out from Jalen Brunson. I think the Knicks needed a guy like that. Now, one thing that Chris Vernon mentioned, and don't quote me on this, one thing that he mentioned on his podcast was that, as a watcher of the NBA every night, watching all these teams, he said, not me, that RJ Barrett looks a little out of shape. He didn't look so hot in the first couple games. Now, we don't want to overreact to anything, but that's just something I found interesting. I don't know if that's to be true, but something to keep in mind if you end up watching the Knicks anytime soon. And then I'm also very intrigued to see and I know they're not a team that we're going to talk about, but how this Utah situation is going to play out. I actually think I sort of like how Danny Ainge might be approaching this. I think they have too much still on that roster to just fully go tank mode. I still think there's too much talent there, and they're still going to have to trade away some pieces, obviously, to go in the direction that we think they're going to go. And they have been heading since they traded Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. But I actually sort of like this approach of sort of possibly driving up the value of some of these pieces that they still have on that roster to maybe trade them a little later in the season when you can get maybe peak value for them, if you will. I think that's an intriguing approach by Danny Ainge, if that's how he's going to approach it. It seems to me like that's the plan. And I kind of like that if I'm Utah.
Yeah, I like that as well. I just think continuing that winning culture, kind of having the mindset of reloading rather than doing a full-on rebuild, might be an interesting way to go here. Obviously, I don't know if many Utah fans would agree with that, especially with the draft prospects in this upcoming draft, of course. But it's a little bit like the way the Clippers handled it with Chris Paul, Blake Griffin leaving, trading those guys, getting solid players back, remaining solid, keeping that good culture, and then bringing in the stars. Obviously, Utah won't be bringing in free agents, but they could trade for a guy later or whatever the case may be. So
that's about all I had. Why not you? I think you had the standings pulled up, right? So why don't you just real fast run through the standings so far, and then we can move on.
Right. Milwaukee's currently the 1 seed at 3-0. Boston 3-1, second seed. Atlanta 3, Cleveland 4, Washington 5, New York Knicks 6, Toronto 7, Chicago 8, Charlotte 9, Miami 10, Brooklyn 11, Philly 12, Indiana 13, Detroit 14, and then Orlando winless at 15. Portland in the first seed in the West, Utah second, Phoenix third, Pelicans fourth, Grizzlies fifth, Timberwolves sixth, Spurs seventh, Denver eighth, Golden State ninth, Clippers 10th, Dallas 11th, OKC 12th, Houston 13th, Sacramento 14th, and LA bringing up the rear winless at 15th. So now we'll get into our Western Conference preview. we have a list of 10 teams that we're going to cover today. We apologize if we don't cover your team. It's not that we don't think your team could possibly get in contend for a playoff spot. We just think these 10 teams create the most intriguing conversations, in our opinion. So we're just going to stick with that.
I want to start with Portland. Or the
Yeah.
Lakers.
Yeah, let's start with Portland.
Let's start with Portland since I already kind of led into that conversation. I sort of gave my thoughts, but I have more thoughts. But I want to hear your thoughts first on sort of what you think of this roster and the best and worst case scenario in your eyes for this upcoming season.
Well, I think I'll start with the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is, the depth of this team kind of comes back to bite them, or rather the lack of depth. And injuries happen here and there. Maybe some nagging injuries with Dame or Anthony Simons or Jeremy Grant. And then I just don't know if this team has enough depth to be able to weather the storm, especially in this tough Western Conference. So to me, the worst case scenario would be, 11 or 12 seed missing the play-in entirely because of injury. But if they stay healthy, I think Dame has shown that he's good enough to get them into the play-in with this supporting cast. So I think, assuming health, which with this segment, that's what we'll be doing. I shouldn't have mentioned the injury thing. Assuming health, I think worst case scenario would be the 10th seed. Assuming maybe their defense kind of regresses to the mean a little bit of the last few years, and then maybe Dame can't quite do enough to play Superman in some of these games where they're not playing much defense. The best case scenario is, Anthony Simons plays at close to an all-star level. Jeremy Grant steps up, Josh Hart steps up, and you get, balanced scoring from those guys in a solid 9-man rotation. And I think if all of that comes together, I think this team can get to as high as the 5th seed.
I agree with you. Look, there were some growing pains for Chauncey Billups in year one last year, but this was a team that was terrorized by injuries. Of course, Damian Lillard limited to 29 games last season due to his injury. Didn't play a whole lot, and when he did play, just didn't look right. He talked about it on the Draymond Green podcast about how his injury just got worse and worse at the beginning of last season, and he finally decided to call it off when the Blazers knew what direction they were heading in. There were some growing pains. They had to undergo some decision-making or some front office turnover this offseason. They made some good moves that I liked. They traded Norman Powell and Robert Covington to the Clippers to accumulate more draft picks. They improved their financial flexibility. With the number 7 pick in the draft, they drafted Shaedon Sharpe, a guy who has shown flashes so far of what he could be. He's an unproven young player, but sort of raw. But if they can tap into his potential, could be a huge piece for this team moving forward with some of the things he can do athletically. I think you really tapped into – I already sort of tapped into the acquisition of Jeremy Grant, the signing Gary Payton II to come off the bench, Anthony Simons playing at a near all-star level along with Lillard, who, as long as he stays healthy and looks somewhat like himself, that's a potent backcourt. You have now sort of the defensive pieces, or more of the defensive pieces that you need that will help this defense to improve. And I think the best case scenario when I think about the Western Conference, it's probably you're a playoff team. You are a 5 or a 6 seed in the West. You've won, I don't know how many games that will equate to, probably 44, 42, 44 games, somewhere in that range, and you're a 5 or a 6 seed in the West. The worst case scenario, I think, is what you mentioned. You're a 10 seed, you barely make the play-in, and your lack of depth ends up hurting you. Lack of proven depth, I should say. Lillard, Simons, Hart, Jeremy Grant, and Nurkic, that's a fine starting five. But off the bench, Shaedon Sharpe, prize rookie prospect, but sort of unproven. Gary Payton dealing with some injury right now. He's really your only proven player coming off the bench. You have Nasir Little, but his time so far in the NBA has been filled and riddled with injuries. But hopefully he can, if he develops into the 3-and-D player, I think he could, that really will up the potential of this team and the depth that they have. So I think we generally agree on Portland.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page there. Let's move on to, let's see here. Let's do the Suns next. That's the next team I have on my list. Um, or actually, let's do the Lakers. Let's continue with the teams that I think are kind of in the same tier of intrigue, I guess you could say. Um, here's my thing with the Lakers. I don't think Russell Westbrook is a bad NBA player, but I just think his skill set is redundant on this team. Um, I think um, the best case scenario is, I think in every best case scenario for this team where they do find a way to right the ship a little bit, it's where they somehow trade Russell Westbrook, and that's not Russell Westbrook slander. I have a lot of respect for Russell Westbrook, but I just think what he brings to the table just isn't what this team needs. Um, his ability to control the offense on the ball, that's not needed on this team. They already have LeBron for that, and giving Russ the ball instead of LeBron doesn't make sense because he's not as good as LeBron at doing those things. So everything that I'm saying has already been said a million times with the Lakers. It's simple, it's annoying, but that's the bottom line to me. I think they have to somehow trade Russell Westbrook and then kind of, clean slate with a couple maybe shooters in the mix, 3-and-D players in the mix, and then try to find that formula from 2020. I don't think they will. I think their best case scenario. I think their best case scenario is probably the 6 or 7 seed. With the lack of shooting this team has, with the way this team fits together, it just doesn't feel like, even if you take Ross out of the mix, players like Patrick Beverly or Lonnie Walker, I don't think those players really fit either. It's just not great for this Lakers team right now. It doesn't matter how you slice it.
Yeah, they're in a tough spot. They were kind of between a rock and a hard place in the off season with Russell Westbrook after he exercised his player option worth $47 million. It didn't give him a whole lot of cap flexibility. They had to sort of try to improve this roster on the margins due to limited spending tools. They got Patrick Beverly. They signed Lonnie Walker, Troy Brown Jr., Damian Jones, Thomas Bryant, Juan Toscano Anderson. That was I guess those were their newcomers. And they didn't fully address their issues. They traded two of their younger players, and Taylor Horton Tucker and Stanley Johnson, to Utah. There's not a whole lot about this roster unless, first of all, as you mentioned, they find a way to offload Russell Westbrook. And number two, Anthony Davis is able to, I'm not even going to say stay healthy because that's obvious, but he's able to be the Anthony Davis, like that Anthony Davis we know he can be, the aggressive, great on defense, even on some nights where LeBron doesn't have it or he's resting, the guy who can be the number one option on this team and take over games. Until I see that, Anthony Davis be that guy that he was in 2020 with the shortened season and the bubble, I don't believe this Lakers team is going to go anywhere. I think their best case scenario is probably like an 8 seed in the West. I just don't think they're better than a lot of these teams that I think are going to be finish above them in the Western Conference. And I think their worst case scenario is probably they're out of the play-in as like a 12 or a 13 seed.
Yeah, could even be worse than that. And on top of all that, with their floor being so low, they don't have their first round pick. I believe they're swapping it to the Pelicans within that Anthony Davis trade. So it just goes from bad to worse the deeper you go into it. It's not good for the Lakers right now. It's pretty simple. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's like beating a dead horse talking about this team. So let's just move on. Next team, let's talk about the Phoenix Suns. The Suns to start the year, to me, the biggest takeaway is Devin Booker. Devin Booker, the one hole in his game was the passing. We saw last year the Mavericks loaded the side of the floor Devin Booker was ISOing on, and he couldn't pass out of those double teams, and he was kind of, stuck a little bit. And that was everybody knew it. That was the next step for him. And so far this year, he has made some incredible passes, and I've been extremely impressed, especially in that Portland game that they lost. Actually, I think he actually played a really good game, one of the best games I've seen him play. So if he keeps this up on top of what he's already done to improve his defense, I think pretty soon Devin Booker will be in that superstar category, which I think is probably what every Phoenix Suns fan was hoping for coming into this year, was Devin Booker to take that next step. So for the Suns, with what they've shown so far this year, I think it's fair to say the best case scenario, I wouldn't rule them out from being the 1 seed. I think even if they are the 1 seed, a lot of people would still doubt them going into the playoffs, which is fair. But this team definitely has a talent to win a ton of games in the regular season. They've shown that to be the case over and over and over again. And I think this time around, Devin Booker, with his improved passing ability, I think can combat that defensive structure that the Mavericks faced him with last year. So, worst case scenario for the Suns, I'd say, is maybe that passing was kind of a flash in the pan from the short sample size, and then they kind of regress a little bit with the loss of Jay Crowder and just some chemistry issues. Maybe Chris Paul doesn't play as well with his with the aging as well. And I guess their worst case scenario, I'd say, would probably be the 6th seed, maybe like 45, 46 games, somewhere in that range.
I'm going to say we're on a pretty good pace here. We're moving along fairly fast, which I'm impressed with. I'm going to say Phoenix's best case scenario is probably top 3 seed in the West. I don't know if I can say it'll be the 1 seed again. This was a team that won.
Say that either, but
I know you didn't say that. I'm just saying for the people out there. I think this is a team that will take a little bit of a step back. I think that's fair to say in the regular season. I don't think they're going to go as hard in the regular season as they did last year when they won 64 games. Still think this team's plenty talented and they could definitely get there. Devin Booker, we saw him get into it a little bit. I believe it was last night with Klay Thompson in that Warriors game, which they ended up winning. And they looked really good doing it. And you mentioned it. First time All-NBA last season. Played well, but he continues to improve his efficiency and his playmaking ability. And if he plays like this consistently throughout the rest of the season going into the playoffs, he could find himself on the fringes of MVP conversation if Phoenix is up there in the standings. And I think it elevates this team's ceiling to another level come playoff time. Because if you look at what happened last year in that collapse, when they lost to the Mavericks in the conference semifinals after getting taken to the brink by the New Orleans Pelicans in round 1, they not only did Chris Paul get hurt, but they just fell apart, it seemed like, offensively. And I'm going to need to see what this whole situation with DeAndre Ayton ends up looking like, because it seemed to me that there was a little bit of, I don't know what the word for it is, but it's just a little awkward how that contract situation went down and DeAndre Ayton's commitment to the Phoenix Suns. I'll just say that. So, but I love Mikal Bridges. I love Cam Johnson, who I think is going to be a fantastic piece moving forward with what he can go give them from a scoring standpoint, sort of like a secondary scorer, shooter from the outside. Cam Payne is another piece, slowed by injuries last year after a breakout season the year before. Looking to see what he's got this upcoming year. And then Torrey Craig also is another guy that I'm looking out for on the bench. But, yeah, I like the Phoenix Suns. I think they're going to be a good regular season team. Probably best case scenario is like a 2 or a 3 seed in the Western Conference. Worst case scenario is probably 6 or a 7 seed.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably right around what I would say as well. And the DeAndre Ayton situation is interesting. Definitely, there's some tension there. There is no question about it. It hasn't shown itself on the court so far this season, which is encouraging. But once they get into high pressure situations, is that trust really going to be there? That's really the question. So that's the Phoenix Suns. Oh, yeah.
I want to lead us into our next team. The next team I want to talk about is the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah, that's who I was going to choose anyway. Perfect.
Okay, well, great minds think alike. Look, I watched, obviously the big storyline. There are a couple big storylines in Minnesota right now. I think the first one is the addition of Rudy Gobert. How will Chris Finch, their head coach, stagger the minutes? What will the lineups look like with Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert on the court together? And will they stagger their minutes in a way that that works for them? Anthony Edwards, another year under his belt. We saw some really, really promising things last year, but another step for Anthony Edwards makes this team scary. Uh, Jaden McDaniels, his growth as an on-ball defender, he's just an absolute problem with what he provides with his length, his wingspan, and his instincts defensively. So he's a whole nother component for them. Um, I think the inconsistency, but also the potency of one D'Angelo Russell in that backcourt is an interesting conversation to have, along with Anthony Edwards. And then you look at their bench. I like the pieces they have. Um, Kyle Anderson, Jordan McLaughlin, uh, Jalen Noel as well. Continues to play a bigger role and had a big night tonight against San Antonio. And then Naz Reid. He's a good post-up presence and, a backup that can provide them good minutes and energy off the bench when one of those other two bigs needs to rest. So I like this roster. I think the biggest questions, as I mentioned, what is Rudy Gobert's tangible impact going to be? And then number two, the growth of Anthony Edwards. Those are the two things I'm watching for. I think the best case scenario for the Timberwolves, considering what they did last season and what they added, at least on paper, I think their best case scenario is probably a 4 or 5 seed in the Western Conference. I think they have the talent to get there. I think their worst case scenario is probably they take a little bit of a step back and they're around a 8 or a 9 seed.
Yeah, that's a wide range, and a lot of these teams have a really wide range. That's what makes the Western Conference fun right now. And I think I'd mostly agree with you there. I mean, the Timberwolves, to me, it's all about what Karl Anthony Towns does and what Anthony Edwards does. Those are the two guys that drive that team. Rudy Gobert, to me, has shown who he is. I don't think he's going to make some crazy random improvement here at this point in his career. He is who he is. And what he is a walking top 5 defense. Year over year, with exception to last year where the Jazz didn't have any perimeter defense, he was a walking top 5 defense. And I think he'll continue to be that. And because of that, I think their questions all come at the offensive end of the floor. Will they be able to play as a cohesive unit on offense? Will they be able to, keep Cat involved in the offense? And how consistent will they be? It seemed like a lot of times last year they lost games because they would just have extremely ice-cold shooting nights. Will that continue? So all those little things contribute to me thinking I think this team will be right at the center of the West. I think 5th or 6th seed is where I would put them. But best case scenario, I would have them. I think best case scenario, I would have them 3rd if everything clicks defensively and that they're say maybe number 1 defense in the league. I think that's not out of the question. If Anthony Davis takes a step defensively and they're able to kind of mask Karl Anthony Towns on the defensive end, they have guys to be able to get it done on that end of the floor, no question. So 3rd seed, worst case scenario, I think I'm just going to have to agree with you. I think 8 or 9. If things just don't click with the 2 big lineup, things could go south, especially in this tough Western Conference.
Does my audio sound better?
Yeah, sounds much better.
Okay, for whatever reason, my mic was not fully plugged in, so I got that all fixed. But yeah, I think we both agree there, and we'll move right along. I want to move. I think we're sort of at that middle point here. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your Dallas Mavericks. So let's go there next. What is your outlook for this Mavericks team? And you can talk about even what you've seen so far in the first couple games.
Well, I think what I've seen has been overwhelmingly positive, despite our 1-2 start. We've played less games than most of the NBA, and I think the rhythm will get there as a team as time goes on. But I've loved what I've seen from Christian Wood, especially on the defensive end. That's been really good to see. The fact that he's been able to switch on the perimeter players and still hold his own in certain spots. I think with that ability, he'll be able to fit in nicely in this system defensively. And then on offense, we've been incredibly streaky. Luka has had hot streaks where he, scores 10, 12 points in a row, does Luka things. But also the other guys as well. Tim Hardaway Jr. has been on and off as usual. Spencer Dinwiddie has hot streaks. Christian Wood, obviously, he's been averaging 25 points a game as a Maverick off the bench in about 26 minutes per game. So I think the offense kind of needs to even out a little bit. And I think this team is better than last year. I think there's more balance there. I think the points that I made before the season started all apply. I think the balance of front court scoring and back court scoring was an element that we were always missing, just that front court threat. And that's what Christian Wood gives us. And a pickup not a lot of people are talking about is JaVale McGee, a guy who can protect the rim and guard those big centers that we struggled against, like DeAndre Ayton. So I think this team's, ceiling is a top 3 seed. But if things go south, assuming health, the worst case scenario is a 6 seed because I think Luka is good enough to keep us out of the play-in. But that's assuming health. If things go poorly and there's injuries, I think we could go as low as the 8 or 9 seed.
Yeah, but for the sake of this segment, we're assuming health. And Luka, I mean, I tuned in to last night's – was it last night? Pelicans, Mavs?
Yep.
Because I of course, I love Luka, and I wanted to see what this Mavs team looked like. But I wanted to also see Zion and what the Pelicans looked like. And I think we'll go there next after I make my points about the Mavericks. But, what the things Luka was doing at points and times in that game, I mean, he just continues to wow me every time I watch him. And he's, at this point, in my opinion, a top 6 bona fide, like you can't take him out of that conversation, player in the NBA. He's going to be an MVP candidate if he continues to put up the numbers he's putting up. I mean, 22, 6, and 6 in the first half last night. Those are numbers that not ordinary basketball players are able to put up in a first half of an NBA basketball game. And he's not an ordinary basketball player. He's an extraordinary basketball player. And with him, I know you lose Jalen Brunson, but I think we hit it on the head in our NBA Power Rankings episode before the season. We both talked about the balance that the additions of Christian Wood and JaVale McGee were going to bring to the front court and the balance they'd have there between offense and defense, front court and back court now, with Luka and Spencer Dinwiddie. Getting a full season of Spencer Dinwiddie. Hopefully he stays healthy. Plus the return of, Tim Hardaway Jr., what he can give you from an all-ball standpoint, but also from a shooting perspective. Christian Wood, as he talked about, averaging those numbers off the bench, becoming a scoring threat in the front court. JaVale McGee, defensively, along with Dorian Finney-Smith, who continues to improve. I mean, this Mavs team definitely has the talent to be a top 3 team in the West. I think their lowest they can go with a healthy team is probably the 6th seed because, as you said, Luka is just too good. If you have a superstar like Luka, it's going to be hard for you to not stay in that top 6 range because there are going to be nights where you're going to win 5-6 games just based solely on Luka and what he's going to do in some of these games.
Right.
And that's not even counting the other nights where he has a big impact, which is basically every night. So
Right.
I think we're about right on where we stand with the Mavericks. It's exciting. They got to a slow start last season, so I wouldn't worry about anything that happens over the next couple of weeks. As long as they're hanging around that 500 mark like they were last year, I think things will start to take off once they get in a rhythm.
Right. Yeah, I'm going to be a lot more patient than I was last year. Like, if you are a longtime podcast listener, you know I kind of hit the panic button, and like right around mid-December, I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's not good." So, moving on though, um, arguably the most fun team in the NBA, the most must-watch team when healthy, the New Orleans Pelicans, who bring back a healthy Zion and now a injured Zion. But despite that, look incredible, look deep, explosive offensively, solid defensively. What do you think about the Pelicans? What do you think their outlook is for this year?
Oh man, they are just highly everything. They're well coached. Willie Green is doing a fantastic job. They are highly explosive offensively. They can score at will with all the pieces that they have. Getting CJ McCollum last year at the trade deadline was humongous and has done wonders for them. I mean, with CJ McCollum and Brandon Ingram, along with a healthy Zion, who's a walking 25 and 10, in my opinion, when he's healthy and right. As long as they can load manage him and keep him healthy, along with Trey Murphy, who was an underrated guy coming out of the draft a couple of years ago out of Virginia, and what he gives them from a 3-and-D perspective in that starting lineup, the versatility he can give you coming off the bench or in that starting lineup with what he's able to do has improved as a scorer on the ball as well, and what he's able to do attacking the bucket. With him and Herb Jones, the defensive versatility, with Jonas Valanciunas, the inside scoring and the rim protection, even Jose Alvarado. I mean, you go down to the 6th and 7th guy on this roster, and they can give you solid minutes on the offensive end of the floor. I think that stands out to me. There's depth here with Devontae Graham and Jose Alvarado at the guard position, at the wing position as well with Trey Murphy and Herb Jones, Zion Williamson, Jonas Valanciunas. I mean, I think it goes both ways. What I watched last night was I think it's a team that can score with anyone. We'll see what the defense looks like on a night-to-night basis. I still think there are some concerns there, but I think for the Pelicans, if things go right this regular season, and we'll have to see what it looks like come the playoffs, because the playoffs are all dependent upon matchups most of the time. But if Zion's healthy, if Brandon Ingram looks like, the semi-all-star version of himself, along with CJ McCollum, and this roster, plays like it has over the first couple games, I think a top 4 seed is not out of the question in the regular season. I think they could definitely get there. If things don't go quite as planned and they're just not buttoned up as this younger team might not be at this point in time, I think the lowest they probably go is probably an 8 seed. I just think there's too much on this roster to go any lower than that. But I've been really impressed by the Pelicans, and I won't be surprised if they end up a top 4 seed in the West.
Absolutely, yeah. The thing I'm going to be watching for this season is their ability to win on the road, particularly those close games on the road. Um, a team that's young and learning how to win. That's always the measuring stick for whether a team is truly ready to, challenge anyone in the playoffs. Is whether they can take those close games on the road in hostile environments. If they're able to do that on a consistent basis, then this team's record is going to be absolutely fantastic. And they absolutely could be a top 4 seed. Even I could even see them being a top 3 seed, if health forbidding, of course, and with stride defensively from some of their star players as well. Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson in particular. So if those things click, I could see this team making a deep playoff run. I really do. Um, the worst case scenario, in my opinion, um, I think the worst case scenario would be the 7th seed, considering they got that valuable playoff experience last year. And I think late in the season, they will be able to win those close games, especially with a veteran guy in the mix like CJ McCollum. Um, I think this is a team in the past that may not have been able to get to the finish line late in the season if they're, in the slog of the Western Conference. But with CJ McCollum, I have a lot of trust in what he's able to do and this coach, Willie Green, as well.
Okay. So, who's our next team?
Let's talk Grizzlies.
You can go first.
It starts and ends with John Morant. It starts and ends with John Morant. Simple as that. To start the year, they're going to be missing Jaren Jackson Jr. for the first, couple months of the season. That's unfortunate, but this team does it every year. I've said it a bunch on this podcast. I'll say it again. This is one of the best organizations in the NBA in terms of roster building year over year, in terms of acquiring young talent through the draft, developing that young talent to where you're able to get some of these young guys into the building and have them make impacts right away on your roster. I believe they have a second-year player, Santa Aldama, they're inserting into the starting lineup in place of Jaren Jackson Jr. And he can shoot. He's able to defend. I mean, he's your prototypical Grizzlies role player, tough.
Yeah.
Will talk in your ear, talk all that stuff. Just fits the culture that this team has built. And that's really what is most impressive to me. I feel like this team is cohesive. They're just so tough and gritty and will grind out those close games. And because of that, I think they have as good a chance as any to win a lot of regular season games. I've watched a lot of, playoff prediction videos, I've listened to a lot of playoff prediction podcasts, and I've seen this team as high as the 1 seed. For me personally, though, I think best case scenario would probably be the 2 seed, because I think one of these veteran teams, either, the Clippers, the Nuggets, or the Warriors, may take that 1 seed. But that's just my personal opinion. But whatever the case, this team is a legitimate threat. Draymond Green said that himself, and he's, he has to play these guys. So he's as good a source as any. And I think once they get healthy, they'll be right there in the mix.
Yeah, the thing with the Grizzlies that I like is they seem to know who they are, and they know what their identity is.
Right.
And you talked about what sort of the new player that you mentioned, and then a lot of these guys, I think, um, kind of embody that same persona, the Xavier Tillmans of the world, um, the Brandon Clarks of the world, Dylan
Right.
Brooks, Desmond Bain, just sort of that tough-minded, gonna play as hard every night as we can, um, you know, come to win every night, the intensity, that sort of thing, the grinded out mentality, the sort of Memphis that's built into this organization and the way that they develop their young players um, is really impressive. And I think with what they have, even without Jaron Jackson Jr., I still think they have the depth there. They need to survive without him. I look at, the guy you mentioned. What's his name?
Santa Aldama, I believe.
Santa Aldama. I'll have to get that name down. And then Xavier Tillman, Zaire Williams, who gained some good, experience last year. He might serve a bigger role in this year's team. And then, of course, John Morant, who, if he's doing John Morant type things, could be in the MVP conversation. And then Desmond Bain's really, I think, the X factor. Uh, there was a game the other night, he scored like 30 some points in the second half. It's just a microwave at points and times as a scorer and as a secondary scorer. I think that could be huge for this Memphis team. And once Jaren Jackson Jr. gets back, he was, an all defensive first team last year. We know what he's going to give you. He led the NBA in block shots. Um, he just needs to get back on the floor, and once he does, a 2-3 seed is in the works for the Memphis Grizzlies. But if not, I think the lowest they probably go is a 6 seed.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I don't think they could maybe go any lower than that, but who knows?
Yeah, I think 6 seed is fair for a worst case scenario. I think this team's culture kind of falls into that category of I don't see them, you know, losing those close games. This is a team that went 20-3 without John Morant last year, so they know how to battle through injuries,
Right.
and they've proven it over the course of a season, and even going, having an impressive playoff series against the eventual champion Golden State Warriors. So um, I feel pretty good about the Grizzlies' chances this year to have a good season. So moving on, next team, let's talk about the Denver Nuggets. Um, a lot of people are high on the Nuggets. I am myself as well. But the slow start, I was kind of expecting this. I was kind of expecting, you're adding a lot of guys back into the system. I think things are going to take time to really start humming again. And until then, I just think Jokic will be the engine as usual, and that will be more than enough to have them kind of. I don't want to say tread water. They have plenty of talent, so it won't be treading water. But I'd say be in position when Jamal Murray finds his stride, when Michael Porter Jr. finds his stride, um, to be in position, high enough seed, good enough record to make a run at the number 1 or 2 seed. That's my thinking there. Um, and then worst case scenario for this team, I don't see this team falling below 5 seed. I think no matter what, I think this team is winning 50 games. With Jokic in the mix, with what they've added in terms of wing defenders, Bruce Brown is a incredibly good fit next to Nikola Jokic, a fit that not a lot of people are talking about. Um, He does all the little things defensively. We know that, but also what he brings as a cutter. Nikola Jokic will, as we know, um, make great use of that on a game-to-game basis. And I just think with guys like Kentavious Caldwell Pope and all the wing defenders they have now, that really raises their ceiling because that was the one thing they really needed was those wing defenders.
Yeah. I think for all the remaining teams, the Nuggets, the Clippers, and the Warriors that we have left to talk about, is that it, by the way?
Mm-hmm.
I think the 1 seed is in play for all of them if things go right. Uh, I think this Denver team is built to win 50, 55 plus games in the regular season. Now, things are going to need to pick up fairly quickly or sooner rather than later if they want to get to that point. And we know the Western Conference is brutal. On a night to night basis, the standings are going to be flip flopping. Every single night, the difference between the um, the 1 and the 6 seed at times might be 2 or 3 games. Um, so, but I do think with what Denver added, as you mentioned, the defensive pieces, the versatility offensively with Bruce Brown, what he gives you off the ball and as a cutter, paired with Jokic, with Kentavious Caldwell Pope as well, the intensity he's going to bring on the defensive end of the floor. Along with a guy coming off the bench in Bones Highland, who's a totally capable combo guard that can give them good minutes. Along with the veteranness of Jeff Green, plus the talents of Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray, even Aaron Gordon at times
Right.
can be that guy that you need. So I think Denver, they're in a great spot right now with this roster. It's just how quickly can Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray find their footing and hit the ground running. And as soon as they do that, they'll be off to the races towards the top of the Western Conference. A 1 or a 2 seed, I think, is realistic if this team is healthy and they play up to their potential. And if not, I think probably a 5 seed is the worst case scenario. 4 or 5 seed, worst case scenario.
Right. I agree. Pretty simple there. I think if things really click, I think a third MVP for Jokic isn't out of the question if he takes another step up, which is definitely possible. I think his efficiency might even be better in the lower sample size. More opportunities to get assists, do the things that he likes to do and not always have to score, score, score. So, yeah, I just really like where this Nuggets team is at. There's a lot of things to like there if you're a Nuggets fan right now. So, moving on to the Los Angeles Clippers, a team that, since the creation of this Kawhi, Paul George duo, we have not seen a complete playoff run of both of all of their key pieces healthy since the bubble, and we all know what happened in the bubble. That was a collapse of epic proportions, but they're a different team now. They're a deeper team, but I also think this is the year they have to do it because I'm a big believer in teams having life cycles. Um, Certain cores have championship windows, and then after a few years, whether it be the belief in that locker room or just um, not being able to get over the hump, whatever the case may be, I just think those championship windows close for certain cores once they've played together for a certain amount of seasons. So it has to be this year, in my opinion. They have a lot of wing defenders. They've built this team in a very strategic way. Clearly, they want to be a switchable team. They want to, play methodically in the half court. Really get 2 feet in the paint and kick out for threes. And that's been a formula that's really worked for them. But really, the question with this team is just, can they just get over the hump? You know, all the talent is there. All of the, you know, all of the ingredients of a championship team are there already. But it's just whether or not they can put it together. And everything that matters for this team all applies to the playoffs. Really, the regular season is just all about getting acclimated, getting these players acclimated, getting Kawhi right, making sure he's healthy come playoff time, and hopefully being high enough to where you'll have a couple of home playoff series. That's where you would want to be if you're a Clippers fan. So to me, the best case scenario is the 1 seed because they do have the talent to, you know, withstand some of the load managing that they do. But for me personally, I don't really see that happening. I think realistically, there will probably be somewhere between the 2 and the 4, and then worst case scenario, maybe down to the 6 seed if things really don't come together for this team, and maybe that life cycle, as I mentioned, kind of ended prematurely before a lot of us really saw it coming. But I don't see that happening either.
The Clippers are interesting. I haven't gotten to watch them yet. I want to watch Kawhi. I'm just so intrigued to see what he looks like. This Clippers team has all the ingredients. There's nothing else that really needs to be said. My question just has always been, can they overcome themselves? They had the coach, Tyronn Lue, respected within NBA circles, respected outside of NBA circles. Has been there, done that in terms of winning a championship. They have players on this roster that have been there, done that, the likes of Kawhi Leonard. And I don't know if they have anyone else on the roster that has necessarily won a championship yet, but they still have that guy. They have another guy who's one of the league's premier two-way stars in Paul George, who has continued to stretch his prime and put up good numbers year after year, well into his 30s now, showing no signs of rust. They added a third guy in John Wall, a little change of speed offensively, can make a lot of the plays, facilitate, get to the basket still, has an improved jump shot. He's looking to prove himself post injuries. Hasn't seen the court a whole lot over the past 3-4 years, but new scenery can always bring about new, a new, what's the word? Just new results.
Yeah, right.
Look, the depth is there. Luke Kennard, Norman Powell, Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, Robert Covington. The additions that they made, the trade with the Trailblazers. I love the roster. It's just whether or not they can overcome themselves. We know about the load management stuff. We know about the Kawhi stuff. And we know what happens come the playoffs. So we'll see what happens. But I do think 1-2 seed probably is best case scenario. I think they can get there. We'll just have to see how the load management works itself out, and how many games Kawhi actually plays. And then worst case scenario is probably a 5 seed in my eyes if they're healthy. They're just too good not to be in that mix, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'm right with you there, and I'll touch on John Wall real quick. I really love this fit for John Wall, and I watched the Clippers the other night briefly. I think it was the game against the Warriors, or it might have been the Lakers. I don't quite remember, but the thing I wanted to point out was in the off season he was talking about I'm ready to take a back seat, let the star players on the team cook, yada yada yada. I'm not gonna look for mine first and foremost. But then he got in the game and his first couple of shots dropped, and you just saw this look in his eye like I'm still John freaking Wall, and he was firing shots up and making them. And I just think that energy in that I don't know. I don't want to say star power, but um, star-like power, I guess. Star-like confidence is a better way to put it. Having that come off the bench is exactly what this team needs. I think he's perfect in that role coming off the bench.
I agree. So with that, we'll move on to our last team, the defending champion, Golden State Warriors. I'll let you start out with this one.
Yeah. This team, we know what they're capable of. Let's just put it that way. Steph is Steph. Clay looks better this with more time, being healthy, having more basketball under his belt post injury. Um, he looks like he's getting better and better by the day, especially on the defensive end of the floor, which is scary. And then the other side of things with the Warriors is always just going to be the young guys. What's James Wiseman going to look like defensively? What's Moses Moody, Jordan Poole, that young core of guys? What are they going to be able to do defensively? And I think that that defensive focus has wavered a little bit to start the year, with the loss of Gary Payton II and Otto Porter Jr. and Juan Desano Anderson, guys that they trusted to defend night after night, veteran guys. But I think that will come in time. I think, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, even Jordan Poole to an extent. I think all those guys have the tools to get it done on the defensive end and at the very least be good team defenders. So I think all of that stuff will come in time. There's no reason to really question this team right now. Um, and I think they have the ability to just turn it on and run away in the regular season in this Western Conference. I think this team is good enough to win over 60 games, and that's saying a lot in this deep of a conference. To have a team that's capable of doing that is very impressive. But I don't think they will. I don't think that's what they want to do. This team is all about winning in the playoffs, winning championships. So I do think their ceiling is the 1 seed, absolutely. But I think it'll be in the 57, 58, 59 win range, somewhere in there. And then worst case scenario with a healthy Warriors team is probably the 3 or 4 seed. And only reason I say 3 or 4 is because I think the West is just going to be incredibly tight and packed in. So tiebreakers matter, one loss here and there matters. So it's just splitting hairs here. It's not really that big of a deal to me.
Yeah, they are the team that, number one, you trust the most come playoff time by far in the West.
Right.
They've been there, done that, won championships, been through the bad times and also dominant times. Steph and Clay. Clay looks back to being Clay. Steph could be an MVP candidate. My really only question with the Warriors is how good is James Wiseman, number one, and then number two, what does Moses Moody look like? He was a guy I was really, I guess, intrigued by coming out of the draft, and I love the young pieces that they do have. with Kuminga is another guy, maybe the most athletic player on the roster. Just, I guess, needs to harness his skill set and mold it to what the Warriors need. And I think with their culture, with Steve Kerr, who's done this over and over and over again, and their leadership, a lot of these young players will, at some point, seamlessly mold into the roles that the Warriors need them to play. And we know from watching the NBA year after year with what this Warriors dynasty has been that things will take off eventually. And once they do, there's really no looking back at that point, unless there is a major injury, which we hope does not happen.
Exactly.
So, yeah, they're champions. It's incredibly impressive that they come back year after year and they continue to do it. Because it's hard to sustain that success, but they've proven that they can do it, and there's no reason to doubt them now. Even as Steph, who, don't get me wrong, I think his game is going to continue to age beautifully. And same thing with Clay, as long as he doesn't have another injury. But, yeah, there's no reason to doubt them now. So I think 1 seed is definitely within their grasp pretty easily. And then if not, a 3 seed, I think, is probably the worst case scenario for the Warriors. I just think they're that good. But you made a good point when you said, tiebreakers in the Western Conference are going to play a huge role in what the seedings look like come playoff time and what those matchups, who gets home court, who doesn't, who's the 6 seed, who's the 7 seed, that sort of thing. So, 1 or 2 games here and there could flip that from a 3 to a 4 seed possibly. But even if they're down there, I mean, as you said, playoffs is what matters. And in a 7-game series, I mean, what, have they lost one? Have they lost a series yet where they have a healthy Steph, Clay, and Draymond?
When Steph, Clay, and Draymond play, they haven't lost a series since 2014 in the first round. And even then, they lost in 7 games to the Clippers. So
that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Within this dynasty, nobody has beat that trio when they play all 7 games. So, yeah, simple as that.
Well, we got here in good time. That is going to wrap it up for the Western Conference preview that we've been waiting to do for over a week now, but we haven't gotten around to it. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Be sure to like and subscribe, and leave in the comment section, because I know not a whole lot of you, if any of you, were tuned in live to this since we are doing it so late at night. But
yeah.
Leave in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you guys. What you guys think about how the Western Conference will shape up. Any hot takes you guys have. Who you guys think, what are the worst and best case scenarios in you guys' eyes of your favorite teams, that sort of thing. We love more fan engagement. So do that, like and subscribe. Tell your friends about the podcast. There's more content coming before you can blink. And we'll be back tomorrow, most likely, for another episode.
Yeah, tomorrow most likely is our NFL Picks podcast, or might be our World Series preview. We haven't decided on that yet, but there most definitely will be an episode. Will be 2 episodes coming before Friday, guaranteed on that. But the order of that, I guess you'll see it when you'll see it. So with that, I'm just gonna have Michael sign us off.
Have a good rest of your week. Be sure to tune into those episodes. And just like Matt Ryan's time as the Colts starting quarterback and the new starting quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts, as of right now, Sam Ehlinger, we are gone.
Peace out.